Welcome to our conversations with AI leaders in Africa. My name is Zenzele Ndlovu. I am the head of research at Machine Learning Africa. Please check out our upcoming event, the AI in Healthcare Summit. You can register for free on aiinhealthcare.co.za. Thank you.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another one of our recordings where Zenzele and I speak to people in our local market who work in the field of smart technology. Smart technology is artificial intelligence, robotic process automation, machine learning, all these things that there's so much hype around. Half the time we don't even understand it. Most of the time we fear it. But there are also some amazing things happening and people doing amazing work. And our guest today, I'm very excited about, especially when it comes to our country and our continent. You know, a few years back, I saw how the world map was even skewed when it showed Africa as a smaller continent related to Europe, for instance, but it's a much larger continent. So if we think of the bias that we sometimes deal with, we think of Africa being such a vastly developing continent, and that many millions of the consumers of tomorrow will be from this continent. And how do we use smart automation, natural language processing, and the like to serve people in Africa where there are 2,000 or 3,000 languages? So very excited to have our guest today, Zenzele. So let me hand over to you to introduce Jade, please.
Johan, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be hosting yet another conversation or another interview today, and we're very pleased to be hosting Jade Abbott. And Jade is the machine learning lead at Retro Rabbit. She holds a Bachelor of Science and a Master of Science in Computer Science. Jade, welcome to our conversations with AI leaders in Africa.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. You are a machine learning engineer. Tell us more. What do you do?
I mean, it's such a, I think these days where everyone gets to pick their own title, their own buzzword. And so I would say, where as a machine learning engineer, I was working in the consulting space, and I started off as a kind of normal software engineer, and having a passion for machine learning. We also ended up with a project in that space, and they said, Jade, you've got to go do this thing now. And this was about 5 to 6 years ago. So there was the world was very different then. A lot of the things that we assume that we think have been there forever weren't around. So doing machine learning in a kind of production software environment was very much untouched. So I had to fail a lot and figure out all the things that we needed to do. So kind of what the role was, is it involved not only training machine learning models to do, at this point, it was various NLP tasks, but also the conversation around how do we trust this model? Should we trust this model? How, we've seen users of like reporting bugs with the model, but it's not really a bug, is it? It's not like traditional software code. How can we use that and improve this model over time and make it better? How can we automate deployment? All the kind of technical stuff about productionizing AI models, which is often, kind of swept under the rug. It's where majority of the work actually is that in the data part. Very much involved in there, and that's my day job essentially. These days I'd say it's more in a kind of leadership realm around these sort of tasks.
Okay, awesome, good to know that.
Jade, firstly I want to ask about Retro Rabbit. What a funky name for a legal entity. and the second part of my question would be, just for our viewers, to explain what is machine learning. So let's start with the rabbit and then get to machine learning, if you would.
Sure. So Retro Rabbit are I think we say on our website is we solve problems with technology. And so essentially software consulting, have been around for 15 years. I've been there for, I think, around 7 or 8 years. and very fun, funky space to work in, very much developer and software engineer centric. We also have a lot of user experience design as part of the group. Based out of Pretoria and Braamfontein, very lovely offices. You should come by one day when this panorama is over. So that's Retro Rabbit. And then what was question number 2?
What the heck is machine learning?
What the heck is machine learning? So in my mind, machine learning is the ability to, given some data, the ability to predict either the future or predict something by learning from that data. And that's probably the simplest description I can give of machine learning. Is we have some data, and we think that we can learn something kind of more general, or we can train a machine to learn something more general in order to produce insights and to produce predictions, to automate a kind of manual human task.
Okay.
Make it sound so simple. Zenzele, I'll leave it over to you.
Indeed. Yeah, Jade, you have worked, I would say, on every stage of machine learning production. I have to assume from defining the machine learning problem to data collection, training the model, to the deployment of the model. Surely you should be having insight from a business side of things in terms of the adoption of this technology in our country and the African continent. Maybe your thoughts on the adoption and maybe the challenges. Is there what slows the pace of adoption? That is, so, if any.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the statistic is that I think it's only 7% of AI initiatives actually make it into production. And that's a global statistic. So we're not doing well as it is. And I think there's a whole variety of issues, but I've spent a lot of time recently really trying to come to terms with what the problems are with enterprises actually deploying AI. And I think a lot of it was that when people started getting into this field, and a lot of businesses were getting advice on how to proceed in data science and proceed in AI. They were given a lot of wrong advice, a lot of preliminary advice, because no one had really learned how this worked. So I think a lot of times businesses, think that they're doing something wrong, but actually, the script didn't exist in the way it does now. And I think in particular, a lot of people were trying to apply AI when actually what they really needed to focus on first in their organization was to ensure that they had really good data governance practice in a way that could, and not in a restrictive way, in a way that made it easier for people to get access to the data within their organizations. And I've definitely seen this in kind of the African context, where there's data that's somewhere in the organization or scattered all over the organization. And if they'd invested a little bit more into the processes around getting access to that data, slowly improving the quality on that data, various other governance activities related to that data, then they'd see it much easier to be able to prototype AI solutions, but also be able to deploy them a little bit better. So I think there's a bit of a gap there. And then my second big gap is this missing expertise, is that people thought data scientists are what we needed. I fundamentally believe that the data science field is this giant unicorn that makes no sense. And what people weren't prioritizing is hiring people with good data engineering skills. And so once we've sorted out like high quality data engineering, that means that, the data scientists aren't sitting there waiting, scratching their head about how they're going to get access or transform the data, which is something fundamentally that data engineers or even software engineers with kind of a data specialty are much better at doing. So I think that's like one of the big slowdowns, and I've got many. I've got about there's so many. Even after that, deploying these models into production and seeing that kind of issue, like there's a whole bunch of issues there. So I would start with number one is just sorting out your data governance, but I could talk about that topic forever.
Yeah.
I love in your LinkedIn profile, you speak about your day job and then your night job. And I'd love to touch on that a bit. And by the way, you've got an incredible website. We'll put the link on the video. I just love the way it's laid out, the look and feel, your picture, and, like the menu buttons look like a bit of code, which most people, including myself, don't always understand. But you speak about Masakane, and you call it a grassroots open research movement for natural language processing for African languages. And I quote, "I'm extremely passionate about changing the way Africa and Africans are currently perceived in the Western world." I would love to unpack that a bit. Tell us about Masakane and your non-day job, if you would.
Yes, so I've always been a little bit of a researcher at heart. But one of the things I really like doing is researching with people. I like it. I ran away from doing a PhD because it's very isolating, but I did find solace in working with people on problems that were really important. And one of the problems that's always been really important to me is, African languages. And I think, coming from South Africa with its, traumatic past, despite the fact I went to school in South Africa, I don't actually know any indigenous Southern African languages. And I always built up this giant fear, and I could feel that it was a force that was kind of tearing people apart and not allowing bridges to be built. So I said, well, I'm too afraid to learn it. So let me try and see if I can train a machine learning model to help me learn it. The machine translation model in particular. And upon doing that, I realized how little there was available. So machine translation, if you're looking at something like the current example of that is Google Translate. And if you use Google Translate for English to French, it performs pretty well. You can do quite a lot with it. But you'll see that they don't support many African languages. And even when they do, they don't support them well. So probably the most well supported is Afrikaans, and that's just because it's a descendant of Dutch. And that's how they managed to get good performance there. Meanwhile, the kind of very complex African languages, particularly languages such as isiZulu, which are extremely complex compared to English, they perform really badly. So for me, it was really about like, how can we build a tool to bridge this? And upon attempting this, I realized how little research there was. I couldn't build upon anything. What existed for English in this kind of space of natural language processing and for which, in other words, is kind of text-based or speech-based artificial intelligence, what existed for English did not exist for majority of African languages. So in realizing how the scale of this problem, me and my co-researcher at the time said we need to create a community of researchers who can work on this, and so that's why we decided to found Masakane, and there it's just a group of African researchers working on these problems from all across the continent, many of them scattered all over the world. We also have a lot of international researchers who are kind of the top in their fields in NLP, who are joining in and learning about African languages and seeing how they can mentor people. So we've got quite a big peer mentorship initiative. So that's my evening job, is kind of making that run. It runs itself half the time in its own chaos, but kind of aiding that or shepherding that.
That is great. It's always good to work with the community, and ultimately, all these technologies should lead to societal benefit. And maybe that leads to my next question: are we going to see the benefits of this technology, cascade to the societal level, where everyone can really benefit from this technology? Because right now there are fears about the displacement of jobs, for example, and the whether this technology will really address some of the challenges that we face as Africans. Are we going to see this technology in the future or in the near future, addressing our problems that we face?
So my opinion is, thankfully, this is quite funny coming from someone who works in the field, machine learning is quite dumb. It needs humans in the loop most of the time in order to catch the cases that don't work out, in order to make it better. And we're so far on from having this tool replace human beings. If anything, what I'd like to see from the technology is to relieve individuals from the boring parts of their work and enable them to focus on the bits that actually need them, allow them to really add value. And so I don't see it replacing at this point any jobs. Like I said, it's not very smart. We call it AI. I call it AD, artificial dumb. It's just a little bit better than what we can program, right? And it behaves a little bit more sporadically. That's that's the field we need to be realistic. It's not going to take over anytime soon. It's not that big. And after doing this a number of times, every time I deploy a machine learning model, it reaffirms how we still have a long way to go. So I do see there being benefit. The spaces where I really see it adding value is in the health space. There's a lot going on there which can make healthcare, which isn't accessible, much more accessible. There are many levels why this is still a really hard problem, but we've got, I know, groups that are working on this. And then the natural language space provides that, a better interface to technology. Because right now it's as if technology doesn't believe Africans exist. If you type in an African name, it thinks it's an error. So what is that saying about how technology sees you as a human being when it can't even acknowledge your name? It doesn't know the places or the roads or anything around that. And I think just starting from there, but also spanning out to really kind of on the ground sort of places such as education. If you could translate the internet into 11 languages, that would be amazing. If we could cheapen the cost of doing translations such that it became more feasible for textbooks, for example, to be translated into all 11 languages, or at least assist the translators so that they can actually do this far more easier. I think there's a lot of interesting space in the natural language processing area to kind of aiding these for good initiatives. I've seen great successes with things like Mom Connect, where they're kind of trying to aid patients, mothers getting advice, and a lot of that is very human-based, but in order to limit the amount of work that the doctors have to do, they have a layer of AI to kind of funnel that down so that people get to work on the problems that really matter, which I think is like a great example of where this has worked.
Oh God, Jade, there's so much to unpack here. I maybe then, as an unfortunate final question, given our time limitations, it seems like we need African solutions for African problems. I think a lot of the global platforms, if we think of natural language processing, like we said earlier, or conversational AI, and I know from the clients I deal with in the banking and the telco space, they struggle to use it for even just the 11 languages in our country, let alone the multitudes in Africa. So if a young person in South Africa or Africa is watching this recording and they want to get into this field to do good when it comes to NLP, where do they start? What do they do? What would your recommendations be?
I mean, they join Masakane is the obvious one. So it's an open initiative. So anyone can join and start coming to our weekly meeting and then participate in the research and try out things and get advice. So that's the one thing. There are also a couple of universities, if people have access to that, which are doing work in natural language processing. Because I'm actually now teaching it at WITS. There's also Vikosi Moravate's got an amazing data science for social good research group, who's usually keen to collaborate or keen to supervise students. Great department at Stellenbosch as well. But yeah, if you don't have those sort of opportunities to go study, then I would say join Masakane, because it's a great place to get started. You will find people who are interested in the same thing. We care a lot about volunteers getting involved. And at the moment, it's a little bit, everyone goes, oh, but you haven't applied it yet. And the reason we haven't applied it is it's not ready, to be applied. We're only running experiments. We've deployed a couple of things which people can try out, but we know they're not ready for the world yet. The field needs to spend a lot of time, investing in research and understanding before we can actually start deploying it to good use.
There you have it. You want to get into this field, join Masakane. Thank you so much, Jade. It's been a great pleasure chatting with you and learning from you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.